Griffith did not become this by accident. He built himself into it, not with one decision, but with repetition, with discipline, with every small act of cutting away whatever in him might hesitate. That is what makes Berserk feel so poisonous. Evil does not crash into the story from the outside. It grows inside a dream. A poor child looks up from the dirt at a castle and decides his life will move toward that height, no matter what it costs. At first, that image feels almost beautiful. It gives him direction. It gives him form. It gives other people something to believe in. But Berserk keeps asking the question that ambition usually hides. What did Griffith have to stop feeling in order to become the man his dream demanded? That is where Schopenhauer matters, not as decoration, as a knife. For Schopenhauer, desire is not some clean choice made by a rational self. It is the will, a blind striving that takes hold of a person and starts arranging everything around its hunger. We tell ourselves we are pursuing a goal. Often it is closer to the truth to say the goal is using us. Once a desire fuses with identity, it stops feeling optional. It begins to feel like destiny. And then anything that slows it down starts to look intolerable. That is Griffith's real danger. Not that he wants too much, but that his dream becomes the standard by which all feeling gets judged. If an emotion strengthens the ascent, it stays. If it interferes, it has to go. In the garden scene with Princess Charlotte, Griffith speaks softly, almost serenely, about what makes a true friend. Not loyalty, not devotion, not love. Only a man with a dream of his own, a man who stands equal, can be called his friend. It sounds noble the first time you hear it, then it curdles, because listen to what that definition does. It strips warmth out of intimacy and replaces it with rank. It turns human closeness into a test of sovereignty. If someone lives for Griffith, fights for Griffith, bleeds for Griffith, but does not stand as an independent will, then that person remains beneath him. Useful, precious even, but still beneath him. That is not just arrogance, it is self-protection. Griffith is building a version of human connection that lets him stay untouched by obligation. Real closeness makes claims on you. It asks you to care for another person, not as part of your ascent, but for their own sake. Griffith keeps redefining love, loyalty, and friendship, until none of them can make that demand. Then Berserk shows what that costs. After battle, Griffith stands before the bodies of dead children in the Band of the Hawk. Not abstract casualties, not glorious sacrifice. Children, small bodies laid out in silence because they believed in him and followed him toward his dream. The scene is devastating because Griffith understands exactly what he is looking at. He knows his kingdom is being built on lives that never got the chance to become one. Oh, still. That stillness matters. Because this is the first real shape of the central question. What did he have to stop feeling? He had to stop feeling the dead as an accusation. If he lets their deaths become morally real, the dream is wounded at its core. The castle is no longer a vision. It is a structure paid for in bodies. So he performs the oldest psychological trick there is. He does not deny the suffering. He converts it. Too much has been lost. Too many have died. That means he cannot turn back now. And that is exactly the kind of movement Schopenhauer saw in the will. Desire does not stop in front of pain and ask whether the pain means it has gone too far. It absorbs pain and turns it into fuel. The more a person sacrifices, the more unbearable it becomes to admit the sacrifice should never have been made. So the striving continues, not because it is justified, but because stopping would release all the buried grief at once. That is why Griffith does not just feel like a villain. He feels recognizable. People do this constantly. They stay inside ambitions that are destroying them because they have already paid too much to quit. They stay in lives they hate because turning back would force them to admit how much was wasted. It is easier to keep climbing than to feel the full weight of what the climb has already cost. Berserk sharpens that truth in the assassination of Julius. The mission is cold enough already, but then Adonis dies, a child, not in battle. As part of war's chaos, just caught inside the machinery of Griffith's ascent and erased by it. Afterward, Griffith breaks down alone by the river. No audience, no charm, no control. He shakes, he cries, and then he says the line that gives away the whole structure. He can never stop now. Not should not will not, can never. That is the language of compulsion. The dream has crossed the line from ambition to inner law, To stop would not just mean failure. It would mean feeling the murdered child, the dead boys, the stains spreading backward across everything he has called destiny. It would mean admitting that no kingdom could justify this. So instead, he turns horror into necessity. That is the darkest thing about Griffith psychologically. He does not become monstrous because he naturally feels nothing. He becomes monstrous because feeling too much would interrupt the dream. The numbness is cultivated, engineered. Grief becomes dangerous. Guilt becomes dangerous. Tenderness becomes dangerous. Anything that could make another life outweigh the vision has to be thinned out or buried. And Berserk keeps returning to that same pressure point. What did Griffith have to stop feeling in order to remain Griffith? At first, the answer seems to be guilt. Then Guts leaves, and the answer gets worse. This is where the structure cracks. Until that moment, Griffith looks almost invulnerable. In the garden with Charlotte, he is composed enough to seem untouchable. Dream gives him shape. His words give him authority. Even his distance feels deliberate. But Guts hears something inside that speech that Griffith either does not notice or does not want to notice. If equality is the condition for friendship, then all his service still places him below Griffith. All the battles, all the loyalty, all the private attention between them, it still does not amount to standing beside him. Guts realizes he is essential, but not equal. Needed, but not acknowledged in the way that matters. That is the wound, not betrayal, clarity. So Guts leaves. And leaving is not just an act of independence. It is Guts answering Griffith's own philosophy. If he wants to be the kind of man Griffith could truly call a friend, then he has to walk away from being possessed by someone else's dream. What makes the scene brutal is Griffith's reaction. He does not speak. He does not persuade. He does not ask Guts to stay. He reaches for his sword immediately, as if force can restore the old arrangement. As if what was won in combat can be kept in combat. That instinct tells you more than any monologue could. In the exact moment he is most emotionally exposed, Griffith does not become clearer. He becomes reflexive. The strategist vanishes. The mask drops. What appears underneath is panic wearing the habits of pride. Then Guts beats him in a single strike. It happens quickly, but psychologically it is catastrophic. Griffith, who can command armies and manipulate courts, suddenly cannot hold on to the one person who has slipped past his systems. He stands there stunned, while Guts walks away. And for one of the only times in Berserk, Griffith looks stripped down to something almost childlike. Not because he lost a duel, because his body understands before his mind does that someone he needed has chosen to live beyond his reach. And that points us back to the central question with a sharper answer. What did Griffith have to stop feeling in order to become the man his dream demanded? Dependence. That is the feeling he cannot tolerate. Schopenhauer is brutal here. We like to imagine our attachments as chosen, manageable, beneath our control. But desire exposes us. The moment another person can disorder your inner world, your fantasy of self-sufficiency collapses. You discover where your pride is weak, where your identity secretly leans on someone else. Desire is humiliating not only because it wants, but because it reveals need. Griffith could survive bloodshed. He could survive guilt. He could turn sacrifice into rhetoric and call it destiny. But needing Guts was a deeper threat than any battlefield. It contradicted the image of himself his ambition required. The Griffith his dream demanded had to be above need, above dependence, above the ordinary human vulnerability of being wounded by another person's absence. So when Guts leaves, Griffith does not just lose a soldier or even a companion. He loses his illusion of sovereignty. Is why he collapses so fast afterward. That night with Charlotte is not a calculated seduction in the usual sense. It is not patience. It is not long-term strategy. It is implosion disguised as action. Griffith has just been forced to feel powerless where he most cannot bear powerlessness, so he lunges toward the nearest act that can flood him with the opposite sensation. Possession, risk, immediate agency, proof that he can still see something. Sleeping with Charlotte is not control. It is what the ruins of control look like. Schopenhauer would say that when the will is blocked, it doesn't become wise. It becomes frantic. It seeks substitutes. It lunges sideways. It reaches for intensity because intensity can briefly numb humiliation. That is Griffith exactly. He cannot master the wound Guts has opened, So he reaches for a reckless act that lets him feel chosen by destiny, rather than abandoned by someone he needed. And Berserk makes sure we understand the irony. The dream that gave him grandeur also taught him what he must never feel. Not helplessness, not dependence, not the truth that another person mattered to him more than his self-image could allow. Once that truth is exposed, the whole structure begins to rot from the inside. When Griffith is rescued from the Tower of Rebirth, Berserk does something crueler than simple tragedy. It removes the last illusion that he can return to the line his life was moving along. His body is destroyed. Nay, his skin is flayed. His limbs barely answer him. He cannot stand as he once stood, cannot hold a sword, cannot command a room by entering it. Then he sees his reflection and understands the full verdict, not merely that he has suffered, that he can no longer be the man his dream required. And for Griffith, that is worse than pain. The kingdom was never just a goal. It was the form that held his identity together. It told him what his suffering meant. It told him what his beauty meant. It told him what all those deaths were for. Without it, he is not simply disappointed. He is emptied out. This is where Schopenhauer becomes precise in a way that hurts. We are not calm cells who happen to possess desires. We are stitched together by striving. The mind comes later and calls that striving purpose, destiny, meaning. So when the object that organized your life becomes unreachable, it does not feel like losing one ambition. It feels like losing the structure that made you intelligible to yourself. That is Griffith in the wagon with Casca. Casca cares for him with a tenderness that in another story might begin healing. For a moment, he reaches toward her. There is still some fragile possibility there, some opening toward a life built not on ascent, but on being loved in ruin. Then he catches his reflection in her eyes and recoils. That recoil tells you everything. Griffith can endure agony. What he cannot endure is reduction, dependence, to be fed, cleaned, carried, receive care instead of admiration, to exist not above others but in need of them. He had accepted devotion when it flowed upward toward his brilliance. Now it arrives as pity, and pity to him is unbearable because it shows him a self his dream never allowed him to imagine surviving as. This is where people flatten him too quickly into simple evil and miss the more disturbing truth. His monstrosity starts before the eclipse. It starts in the refusal to live as someone diminished. He cannot accept gratitude. He cannot accept helplessness. He cannot accept being loved in a broken state, because to accept those things would mean admitting he exists apart from the dream, that he might still be a human life even without greatness, and that is exactly what his whole psyche has been organized to deny. So when he seizes the wagon and drives it toward the lake, it is not just despair, it is judgment. He is testing whether any form of life remains that he can inhabit without annihilating his self-conception. The answer, as far as Griffith can bear it, is no, and that returns us again to the central question. What did Griffith have to stop feeling in order to become the man his dream demanded? Now the answer expands. Not just guilt, not just dependence. He had to stop feeling shame. He had to stop feeling gratitude. He had to stop feeling the possibility that love without grandeur might still be enough. That is why the God Hands offer works. They do not create a new desire in him. They speak directly to the structure that was already there. They take all the emotions he cannot survive, shame, remorse, helplessness, dependence, and offer him a way out. You do not have to remain this broken thing. You do not have to live under the gaze of those who saw your weakness. You do not have to feel the full cost of what brought you here. Keep moving. Keep ascending. Pay the price you have been approaching all along. That is what makes the scene darker than a bargain with evil. It is not just temptation. It is emotional amputation presented as destiny. And people do lesser versions of this constantly. They betray someone loyal, abandon someone loving, bury their conscience under words like realism or ambition or necessity. Usually what they mean is much simpler and uglier. If I fully feel what this makes me, I will not be able to go through with it. So Griffith accepts. And the acceptance only makes sense if you keep asking the same question Berserk has been building the whole time. What did he have to stop feeling? Everything that could still bind him to other people as people. The eclipse is horrifying not only because of what Griffith does, but because of the condition required for him to do it. By the time Femto emerges, the band of the Hawk is being torn apart around him. Men who gave him their lives are screaming his name while they are ripped open. Casca is there. Guts is there. The whole human history of his ascent is there, ed into one final moment where another person's reality should become undeniable. But he does not hesitate. That absence is the horror. Not rage, not frenzy, not even visible hatred. Absence. A perfect stillness where fellow feeling should be. And that absence matters because it was made. It was prepared. Long before the eclipse, Griffith had already been training himself toward this. He had already learned to reinterpret guilt as necessity, sacrifice as momentum, attachment as weakness, dependence as humiliation. The eclipse is not the start of his inhumanity. It is the completed form of a process that has been unfolding the whole story. Schopenhauer helps here, in a way that cuts deeper than the cliché that ambition corrupts. For him, compassion is the rare moment when the rule of the will breaks. It is the moment another person stops being material inside your private striving and becomes real in their own right. That is why compassion is so disruptive. It interrupts the logic of use. It says, this life is not here for your project. Griffith cannot allow that interruption. His dream requires uninterrupted willing, so compassion has to be severed. Pity has to be severed. Gratitude has to be severed. Love has to be severed. Anything that would make another person matter more than the ascent has to be cut away. That is why what he does to Casca in front of Guts is so much more horrifying than lust or cruelty alone. It is not random. It is desecration with purpose. Wrecked attack on the last bonds that still carry the memory of Griffith as vulnerable, dependent, human. Guts saw him broken. Casca cared for him in that brokenness. They are witnesses to the version of himself he most needs annihilated. So Femto does not simply hurt them. He destroys the emotional world in which they could still accuse him. That is why Femto is not Griffith at his strongest. Femto is Griffith after the final refusal to feel. And that is the answer Berserk keeps forcing us back toward. What did Griffith have to stop feeling in order to become the man his dream demanded? He had to stop feeling guilt as binding. He had to stop feeling the dead as a claim on him. He had to stop feeling dependence as truth. He had to stop feeling shame at what he had become. He had to stop feeling gratitude toward those who kept him alive. He had to stop feeling love, pity, and remorse strongly enough to interrupt the ascent. He did not become monstrous because he was empty from the beginning. He became monstrous because feeling itself became the obstacle. That is Berserk's darkest insight. A dream can give your life form. It can save you from drift. It can gather your pain into direction. But if that dream becomes absolute, it starts deciding what in you is allowed to survive. Conscience becomes inefficiency. Tenderness becomes weakness. Other people become material. And the more you sacrifice, the harder it becomes to admit the dream is deforming you. Then you would have to feel what all those sacrifices really meant. That is why Griffith lingers in the mind long after the eclipse. Not because he turns evil in some abstract mythic way, because his fall is built out of recognizably human evasions. Rationalized guilt, buried shame, refused dependence, the conversion of pain into momentum, the decision to call numbness strength. Most people will never stand where Griffith stands, but the mechanism is familiar. People train themselves not to feel all the time. They call it discipline, focus, professionalism, growth. Usually there is a dream behind it, some image of who they must become. And somewhere along the way, the question starts waiting for them too. What have you taught yourself not to feel in order to keep going? That is why Griffith is horrifying. Not just because of the wings, not just because of the sacrifice, not just because of what he becomes, but because the first cut is so understandable, and because long before he becomes inhuman, he learns how to silence the parts of himself that still know the difference. In the end, Griffith's tragedy is not that he wanted a kingdom. It's that he reached a point where becoming worthy of that kingdom meant becoming unable to be touched by other people at all. Schopenhauer would say the will does not just chase an object, it devours whatever in us resists the chase, and the deepest resistance was never weakness, it was conscience, dependence, the ability to be. Broken by love. That is what makes Griffith more than a monster. He is a warning, not because most people will commit horrors on his scale, but because ordinary life is full of smaller betrayals of feeling. We bury guilt to protect ambition. We call detachment maturity. We treat tenderness like a threat to momentum. And little by little, the dream stops serving us. We start serving it. Maybe that is the real fear inside Berserk. Not that a dream can fail, but that it can succeed by hollowing you out first. So the question Griffith leaves behind is not only who he became. It is what any of us are willing to stop feeling in order to keep becoming ourselves. If that hit you, tell me in the comments what feeling you think Griffith had to kill first. And subscribe if you want more anime philosophy videos that stay with you after the screen goes dark.